I started with Reimagining Philanthropy, where I challenged donors to give differently, to have a different set of expectations. But Louis said that's not enough. Jimmy, if you'll change the donors, I'll work on changing the individual nonprofit organization so donors would more gladly invest in them. And out of that effort came the new book, Reimagining Nonprofits. Pal, it's always good to be with you. Been here 1,000 times. Can't wait to hear what's new. Go ahead.
Jimmy, thanks so much. You're exactly right. You wrote Reimagining Philanthropy to Donors, and what we continue to confront in the nonprofit sector is brokenness within nonprofits, brokenness with the way the staff is structured, brokenness with boards, brokenness with the way donors want to be involved with nonprofits. The entire way the nonprofit sector has been set up and has been handed to us is broken, and it needs to be fixed. And so that is the passion and motivation behind Reimagining Nonprofits. What I do in the beginning of the book is lay out the brokenness. I describe how bad things are. It's a look in the mirror. And then in the next 10 chapters, I lay out solutions that can be implemented by any nonprofit of any size anywhere in the country.
I think we did a good job this first 10 minutes about overviewing some of the issues we fight systemically as the problem. What are some of the solutions? Because you got 10 chapters for that.
Right. So let me run down them, Jimmy. Number one, treat your donors as your customers. If you look at the best corporations in the world, they provide an experience for their customer, and they devote millions and millions of dollars on retaining existing customers and upselling them. And if we can learn to create an experience for our donors and understand that donors will invest more when we invest more in them, then our time priorities begin to shift. Instead of spending 95 to 99% of our time on program service delivery, what if we spend at least half of our time on the needs of our customers, i.e. our donors? So I describe methods for doing that. Then we have to know our numbers. Jimmy, you would be astonished. I talk to nonprofit leaders every day, and I'll say, well, what was your revenue last year? And they don't know. I'll say, well, how many people did you help last year? Well, I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. A corporate executive is expected to know her numbers backward and forward, and so too should a nonprofit executive and staff member know our numbers, because if we don't know our numbers, we can't grow them. Then we need the strong CEO. We've talked a lot about that. That's really important. We need proper staff compensation. Just mentioned that a few minutes earlier. We need to pay our people what they're worth and offer health care and retirement so that we can retain them rather than turning them over every 12 to 18 months. We need to get boards out of the way. Boards don't need to be micromanaging the day-to-day operations of the organizations. Boards need to be there for advice and accountability. We need to eliminate piety. We've got to stop thinking about the nonprofit sector as somehow different than another business. It occupies a different tax status, but in terms of the way we run the nonprofit, it has to be run like a business, not a hobby. It's not about how we feel, it's about how the numbers are generated. In order to generate those numbers, we have to monetize every hour. We don't have time to waste on the same old staff meetings, the same old events, the same old tired board meetings. How many nonprofits, Jimmy, the CEO comes out of a board meeting and has got 4 or 5 things to do, and by the time she gets those 4 or 5 things done to report back to the board, has to start preparing for the next board meeting. How many nonprofits are spending 2 hours, 3 hours a week on staff meetings instead of being out doing their job and focusing on their donors?
Louis, let me put you on the spot. We do this when we're in front of large audiences. What you just talked about was monetizing every hour. Are you able to get your phone? Let's say it's a $5 million organization. Do you mind going through that exercise real quick?
Sure. How about if I do it for a 3 million organization? That may be more typical. So if you have a $3 million organization, you've got 48 weeks to raise $3 million, which means I want you to have 4 weeks off. You should have time with your family. You should have time to have fun. Within those 48 weeks, you've got 40 hours. It's not healthy to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. We should have a normal 40-hour work week. So if you're going to raise $3 million over 48 weeks at 40 hours a week, it means that you need to raise $1,562.50 every hour. So if we're doing anything that's not worth at least $1,562, Jimmy, then we shouldn't be doing it.
Right. Keep moving through the solutions.
So then we go into events. Events are the bane of most nonprofits' existences, right? Because our staff spends hours and hours and hours planning and pulling off these events, and then they're exhausted and burned out, and then we're not monetizing them. I mean, how many events have we heard of where we're only generating 28,000, 45,000, and yet we're spending hundreds of staff hours? So we have a solution in the book where you have a 1-2-hour event every year that's a dinner and a few speakers talking about how lives have been changed and saved by the organization. And then we make an ask and we do a live tally. Jimmy, we've done hundreds of these events and we always raise at least $300,000 or $400,000, sometimes over $1 million in one evening. The staff is not burned out. The donors are happy that we've respected their time with 2 hours on a Thursday night, and people leave feeling great about what they've done to help their community. Then we've got to, without apology, put a price tag on our mission. Instead of saying, well, just give what's on your heart or just give what makes sense to you. By the way, we would never do that with any other product or service in our world, right? The car dealer never says to you, oh, you want to drive off the lot in this Hyundai? Well, just give what's on your heart. No, there's a price tag. If you want a product or a service, you have to assess the value of that product or service. And it's no different in the nonprofit sector. And so we have to start asking people for concrete amounts. Jimmy, if you'd like to help 300 kids in our after-school program, we thought you'd like to consider an investment of $25,000 that would enable us to serve those 300 kids for 6 months of this year. See, that puts a price tag for you as the donor. Now you've got a place to start. You may decide to give more, you may decide to give less, but now you know what the impact costs, and we've got to do that without apology, and that number has to include everything. Not just what it costs for the books or the pencils or the curriculum, but everything that it costs to run the organization has to be included in your mission's price tag. And finally, Jimmy, we've got to spend time with people one-on-one. And I know it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work to call people, to schedule meetings, to reschedule meetings. But we find over and over again, Jimmy, that when we sit down with our donors, when we sit down with our board members, when we sit down with our staff members, when we sit down with our volunteers one-on-one and have a conversation about getting to know each other, and then transition that conversation to, I'd like to run some ideas by you. I'd like to get your advice on what we're facing with this nonprofit. We find over and over again, those conversations lead significantly to growing revenue and growing impact. Contrast that to the CEO who wants to go into a staff meeting or a board meeting or an event and cast this wonderful vision and expect everyone to get behind it. It just doesn't work that way. We have to start one-on-one.